Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and this tutorial is very special to me. My husband and I just celebrate our 20th anniversary, and I let him decide where we are going to go. Being the geologist that he is, he decided on Utah. And I was so inspired by this landscape. The textures, the colors, even the flowers, and look at the veinings in the rock, that I decided I needed to make a cake with this as the inspiration. So I used the landscape, the colors, the texture, and the flowers all put together to come up with my design. So these are the colors that I came up with for the rock part of this cake. This is Color Mill that I used. Well, I used Americolor Ivory, Color Mill Clay, and just a dark chocolate brown for my three colors, because those are the colors of background, like the overall general landscape colors that really stuck out to me. So I rolled out these pieces fairly thin, put them on foam, and I set them out in the air overnight so that they could dry up some. So this is the next day. And I'm just jumping in with stacking my cakes. I did a 3-layer cake, a tall bottom tier, medium size middle, and a shorter top tier. And I just stacked them with some bubble tea straws. And I just put that in the refrigerator while I worked on the rest of the fondant details here. I just rolled out a disc of the ivory to put on the top. I didn't worry about covering the tops of the other 2 tiers because I wasn't sure where exactly the color changes were going to happen. And I knew I was going to have a raised rough edge on all the tiers, so I didn't worry too much about it. So I measured the height and the circumference of each tier, wrote it down. And now I'm taking my dried fondant and I'm just crumbling it into pieces. This is where I'm going to get the texture into the rock. Because if you look at that rock, it has texture to it. It's not just all smooth. So this was my interpretation of how to get some texture. Now the ivory, I kind of wish I'd add a little bit of brown to it to get it a little closer to the ivory that I saw in Utah. That's okay. Things aren't always perfect. We're going with this, and I think it worked out great anyways. So I'm just rolling out a few of the ivory pieces. I didn't crumble those. I rolled them out to try to get kind of that crackled effect, since this is tone on tone. And I just attached them with a little bit of shortening and a little water where the shortening didn't actually get it to stick. I'm just rolling it out a little bit more to make sure that those are stuck in and kind of ingrained into the fondant on the bottom. I'm just cutting it out for the size of the top tier, height and circumference that I measured out. And I just set that aside, and you can kind of see the texture there. And now this is how I'm going to do my gradation of colors for the bottom 2 tiers. Well, the bottom one in particular. I'm just taking the 2 darker colors. I squish them together, and then I'm just kind of folding it, repeatedly folding it, and then adding some pieces from each color into the other so that you have more of that gradation instead of just a faded line. And the more you fold it and roll it out, the more the 2 colors will blend together. You can see it's starting to happen there. And I'm just seeing if it's big enough, and it wasn't, so I needed to roll it out a little thinner. I ended up rolling it out a little thinner than I wanted. I wish I had more fondant to work with, but I didn't, so I still made it work. Just setting it aside and letting it firm up a little bit more is what helped with that. So I really liked how these colors are merging together. I think that's really pretty. I'm just making sure it's not sticking to the surface there with some cornstarch. And then I'm adding a few pieces where it got a little too thin on the bottom section. And then I decided to go ahead and fold it up again so I could kind of redistribute the thickness a little bit. There's no shame in it. This is not an exact science. If it's not working out, roll it back up and start over. As long as you're not folding it wrong, as long as you're still folding it so that the dark is with the dark and the light is with the light, and you have that mid-tone in the middle, then it's fine. And I left that in there because I wanted to show you guys that I don't always get it right the first time either. So now I'm just cutting a straight edge on the bottom and then cutting off the sides so that it's the exact right size. I'm not worried about the top because I know I'm going to tear that once I've placed it on the cake. And here's where I'm adding some of those crumbled pieces. I'm adding some of the light in with the dark and vice versa. And still, I guess, not just that. I put some dark pieces in with the dark and some light in with the light, but I made sure that they were overlapped a little bit. And for that veining, that was one of my biggest inspirations on this whole trip, was that veining that I showed you at the very beginning. If you look closely at it, there's hints of blue and there's hints of purple. And I absolutely love that. So I added that all together and rolled it out the same technique. And it didn't need to be the height of this middle tier because I knew I didn't want it to cover the entire middle tier. I wanted it to kind of be veining through it like you saw in nature. And I'm attaching them to each other with just some shortening and pop any air bubbles that you might accidentally create. Set that aside, and this is how I'm turning this over. I just cut a piece of acetate, added some shortening to it, and just flipped it over like that. So that when I lift it onto the cake, it's right side out. My boss came in right then. That's who I was talking to. It's really hard to do this kind of a cake without getting your face in it. And then once I lifted it up, I made sure that I cut off the excess. I'm just ripping off that extra edge on the top to give it that more of a natural, uneven finish. And before we get too far here, you can see what I'm doing. I want to explain the flower situation. I did want to incorporate some flowers. Now, the flowers in the desert, I figured nature knows what colors go with this landscape. So I just went against my natural instinct and used the colors that were in nature because they're not so much coordinating, or they're not matchy-matchy, they're coordinating. They go with it because nature says they do, right? So I naturally want to add more flowers. I'm just used to it with weddings. I like to overload with flowers, but I'm also aware that in nature, the flowers are there, but they're sparse. So I did two different versions. I did swags that I added with the overloaded flowers, and I also went back and I took those off. I don't show you this, but it's pretty simple. I just took the swags off, and then I added a few individual flowers here and there, more scattered, kind of like in the thumbnail. Now, I want you to tell me which one you like better. I think it's a personal preference. My husband thinks the sparse is better because, he's like I said, geologist. And he wants it, if it's going to be like nature, like the landscape we saw, he wants it to be like that. But for me personally, that is my inspiration. It's art. Interpret it how you will. It's a personal preference, like I said. So you tell me what you guys prefer. But I just used wire and floral wire and floral tape to make these swags. You just kind of place them on, wrap some tape around it, move down a little bit, add another one. Just make sure when you cut your flowers that you have enough stem left to actually do this technique, because you need longer stem than you think. Otherwise, your flowers are just going to be like tightly right up next to each other, and you won't have any length on the stems to kind of move them where you want to. Now, I just stuck this right in the cake. Really, I don't know that there's really any other way to do it. I suppose you could put a straw in the bottom tier on that one. You could do that, but since this is for demonstration purposes, I didn't worry about it so much. But there is floral wire around the wire, floral tape around the wires. And then I did use some extra floral wire made into a U shape to anchor them into the cake. Now, that is a hot topic. I know not everybody agrees with that, but sometimes not everything on a cake can be edible. It's just, you cannot do some things without something non-edible helping you. So just, inform your customers, tell them what's going on, tell them what needs to be removed, include it in a contract if you need to. That's just my take on it. Everybody has a different opinion. So I'm just filling in with some extra flowers where needed. Sometimes you don't really know until you step back and look at it and like, okay, there's a little bare space there. I need to add that in there. So you can do that too. Typically at this point, you'll be at the venue and adding the flowers on the table. So you don't have to worry about it being moved so much. So here's our two versions. I hope you guys really liked it. This cake really meant something to me personally. And I hope you guys see the inspiration in it and why I came up with what I did. So hope you learned something. Hope you got something from it. I appreciate you watching my video, and we'll catch you on the next one.